Hello and welcome. In today's video, I'm going to share with you Ark's 10 best tames for getting on with that grind. But just before we get into it, make sure to like and subscribe as it really does help the channel. In at number 10 is the Casteroides, also known as the Beaver. This thing is an extremely useful tame for gathering wood, and it is okay for gathering things like silica pearls, as this thing is a reasonably good swimmer. But to be honest, what would you expect? This thing is a beaver. Also, if you're on the hunt for cementing paste as well, beaver dams are a great shout for getting all of that. And you can also get rare flowers, rare mushrooms, and I think even silica pearls from beaver dams as well. So it is definitely a great shout to go and raid those as well. But the beaver, obviously, as I said before, is a really good gatherer of wood. It means you don't even need to have something like a chainsaw to get all of that necessary wood. Also, on top of all of that, like the RG, the Casteroides saddle is also a portable smithy. I don't really know why it is, as it doesn't really have any involvement with metal gathering, but its saddle does act as a portable smithy, so if your tools break when you're out gathering with one of these things, you can actually repair them in its saddle, which just acts as a normal smithy. The Casteroides is definitely a tame that you should get at some point, but they can be a little aggressive when they're in larger groups. In at number 9 is the Bronto. This is probably Ark's best berry harvester, and obviously this is a grind. You're going to be grinding all of those narco berries for all of those narcotics, and if you can shell up for a Bronto, then you are definitely doing extremely good, as the Bronto has such a wide gathering range. It is absolutely insane how many berries you can gather with this thing just from one attack. A lot more than something like a Stego, a Parasaur, or even a Diplo, even though I tend to use a Diplo a lot more as they are smaller and a lot easier to tame. You can always shell out for a Diplo if you can't go the full stretch to do something like a Bronto. The Diplo is only a passive tame, so no tranks are required at all. But the Bronto is definitely the step up that at some point you should get, as it gathers so many berries. It is 100% worth it. In at number 8 is the Beelzebufo. Now, over the past couple of weeks, my opinion has changed quite a lot on this, and actually yesterday I tested it out, and it definitely is a very viable gatherer of cementing paste. And actually, this thing is really a great shout if beaver dams for some reason don't spawn on your map, or if you have a really good level frog with a good level saddle. It can be a good shout to get one, as when these things kill insects, these things gather so much cementing paste, and it is really great if you want to do the insect cave on the island, which is located in the redwoods. Yes, you'll need to level up one to actually allow it to have enough health and enough damage to withstand those, but the amount of cementing paste gains you get from that is absolutely insane. And if you haven't played Ark before, then you wouldn't know how important cementing paste is for the game. It's used in things like saddles, weapons, and all of that kind of business. Even metal structures. It doesn't seem like that would be the thing for it, but yes, metal structures even use cementing paste, and many mods use it as well. It is definitely an essential resource, and gathering it is a lot better than crafting it, as the amount of chitin, keratin, and rocks you need to gather is absolutely absurd and not worth it. In at number 7 is the Basilosaurus. This is by far one of the best creatures to go into the ocean with and go and loot all of that ocean loot. It is also great for grinding through all of those ocean caves as well. This is a great shout for anything underwater. It deals a very reasonable amount of damage. It is immune to things like Tusos, jellyfish, and electric eels, which makes this thing just so powerful compared to any other creature. Even creatures like the Mosasaur do not have this ability. And also with the Basilosaurus on Genesis Part 2, these things are even better, as they have damage reduction on top of all of those stats which I have just previously mentioned. The Basilo only does have one real disadvantage, which is if it goes too deep, this thing will start taking damage, and also its taming method can be a bit of an annoyance as well, as getting rid of all of those mantas that are around it can be a very challenging task, even though it doesn't seem like it. Also, they are a passive tame, so taming can be a little slow. In at number 6 is the Snow Owl. Now, you may think this thing only spawns on Extinction, but it is accessible on many other maps, like I'm pretty sure if this thing is accessible on Fjordur. And the Snow Owl is 100% worth your tame. With a simple trap or the net gun, I think you can net gun this. This is a very, very easy tame that will not really take you any time at all. The Snow Owl has a wealth of abilities. Firstly, its dive bomb ability, which it also does share with the Griffin. Except on the Snow Owl, it has been further refined and developed, and it feels a lot smoother, and for some reason feels a bit faster as well, but that might just be me. Also, on top of that, the Snow Owl has this kind of heat-seeking ability, which is really great for any of you PvP players out there. As you can see, any players that may be hiding in bushes, as it will see through all of these kind of objects, and they will have this glowing heat, which you can see on screen here. And that is such an easy way to detect people that may be raiding your base and you have lost them, so then you can quickly find them and dispose of them as you wish. Also, these things do have a healing ability as well, very similar to the Daedon, except this uses stamina and not food. Also, on top of all of that, it will heal enemy creatures and wild creatures as well, which can work in your favor, but it is definitely something to consider, as you might not want to use it in a raid right in front of the enemy creatures, as you'll be healing them as well, and it will also render you immobile, which may not be great if someone is trying to kill you. So definitely be careful when you are using this ability, and really take into mind when you're using it. Yes, compared to the Mana Gama on Extinction, this thing really does pale in comparison in terms of speed, but all of its other abilities makes this a much more useful creature for PvE, and I would say for PvP as well, except some of you may disagree with me there, as the Mana Gama really is overpowered, even after that thing got nerfed. But overall, these things are also really good for getting that metal grind on. In at number 5 is the gas bags. Yet another creature that is originally on Extinction, but now can be found on other maps like Fjordur. This thing is definitely a great grinding creature for gathering things like metal and any other resources that have a really heavy carry weight. Also, on top of all of that, this thing's saddle doesn't even need a saddle to ride it. Yes, the gas bags does have a saddle, but that is only required if you need 2 people riding on it at the same time. And for this thing, it can be a very reasonable flying taxi if you do want to go around with your friend and gather up some metal. Except the main thing is, these things are very difficult to control, as they have these kind of gas flying control abilities, and I am absolutely terrible still to this day at controlling it. And also, if you did want longer fly times, as you may have seen in the B-roll a little bit earlier, you need to level up their oxygen stats, and obviously this will enable them to fly further distances as they can breathe in more air. Don't level up stamina if you're trying to fly longer distances. That simply is not going to work in any manner at all. Also, these things are actually reasonably good turret soakers, as when they breathe up with their gas, they have so much damage reduction, and you'll probably know that, as if you're trying to tame one and it blows up, you'll need a significantly larger amount of tranks to knock it out, as obviously it will have torpor reduction as well. But definitely be careful of when this thing runs out of gas and you come plummeting back down to the map. Remember to always dismount just before you hit the ground, so you will take no fall damage, as you really do not want to lose your gas bags, as sometimes they can be a bit of a pain to tame. They are a lot better now with net guns, but it still is a real shame if you lose one of these things, as it is a bit of a hassle to tame them. Yes, it may not be the most difficult tame out there, but you really do not want to be losing this thing to fall damage. In at number 4 is the Mantis. Now, this is by far one of my favourite art creatures, and it is an essential on maps like Scorched Earth and Ragnarok. And yes, some people may still think that the mantis only spawns on Scorched Earth, but this thing also does spawn on Ragnarok as well, and that is definitely my preferred area to tame it, as you can use woolly rhino horns instead of using deathworm horns. Yes, you can use woolly rhino horns on Scorched Earth, but you do have to do a bit more transferring, so you might as well just do it on a map where woolly rhinos spawn, which is Ragnarok. And Ragnarok is a lot more friendly in its environment where the mantis spawned as well. But enough about how to tame this thing, what about its grinding capabilities? This thing, if you didn't know already, or if you didn't look at the screen for some reason, can equip melee weapons. Yes, any kind of melee weapon. That be a pick, a hatchet, a pike, a sickle, whatever melee weapon you want. I'm not sure about tech weapons, but apart from that, you are good to go. This is great for doing any kind of meat gathering. It's very good at doing metal gathering, flint gathering, stone gathering, fiber gathering, maybe not berry gathering because it's not a berry harvester, but any resource that can be gathered via melee weapons, this thing has you covered on so many terms, and it is a really great harvester and arc grinder. In at number 3 is the Carcharodontosaurus. Now, you may not consider this thing a harvester. Well, I would definitely disagree with you there. This thing is by far one of the best harvesters of meat in the game. The Giga would have been in this position, but the Carcharodontosaurus is so much easier to use in the Giga for gathering meat that the Giga doesn't even really deserve a place on this list anymore. The Carcharodontosaurus is a lot faster than the Giga. The Carcharodontosaurus has a lot more stamina than the Giga, which really makes this thing not a pain to use. And when its Blood Rage ability is at its fullest, this thing does even more damage than the Giga. I think it's about 1.5 times on average, so this thing is a true beast. Also, on top of that, you do not have to worry about the rage meter, as the Carcharodontosaurus simply doesn't have one, which is really great if you are harvesting some bigger carnivores. It's just one less thing that you do not have to stress over and worry that you will lose your tame over. But like every great creature, this also does have a downside as well, which is its taming method is a bit annoying at times, and it can be quite buggy as well. But if you did want a good guide on how to tame yourself a Carcharodontosaurus, you can go check out my Carcharodontosaurus guide on my channel. As you know, you may want to tame yourself a Carcharodontosaurus, considering how good they are. In at number 2 is the RG. Now, this is by far one of the best creatures for just gathering resources in itself. Yes, this isn't the creature that is going to be doing the resource gathering. That creature is in number 1, by the way, but this is the creature that's going to get you from point A to B and carry all of those resources around with you. The Argentavis is a really great tame, which is insane for gathering resources like metal, obsidian, crystal, etc. If it comes from a mountain region, this thing probably has some insane weight reduction on it. Also, its saddle acts as a portable smithy as well, so when you're harvesting with those weapons or the creature that is your number 1, you can quickly fix them up. And it is also great if you're on your travels and your armor's broken and you're wearing flak at the time, you can quickly repair it inside the RG as long as you have a bit of smelted metal inside its inventory, and that is a really great feature to have. Also, this thing is reasonably good for taming as well. Its taming method isn't that bad, and on top of that, this thing can carry a wealth of creatures, similarly to the Wyvern actually, which makes it extremely useful. And it has a secret hidden ability where if it eats a dead corpse, it will have some insane regen. And in at number 1 is the Anki. The Anki is by far the best creature for gathering metal. And if you've ever wondered, yes, you have the stone pick, then you have the metal pick, surely there should be another tier of pickaxe. And in this case, that tier is the Anki. Obviously, you have the Doedicurus here as well, which is great for gathering things like stone. But for things like metal, which you're really going to be grinding a lot of, the Anki is the way to go. The Doedicurus simply is not going to gather any of those resources at the level that the Anki does. Also, the Anki can be picked up with the RG and is a really great pairing with it, as you can simply pick up the Anki with the RG and dangle it over some metal nodes, and it will simply swipe and gather up all of that metal. It is a super easy way to get metal, it's really efficient, and you're going to be gathering a lot of metal in really large quantities. And also, like the RG, this thing has great weight as well. I'm not sure if it has weight reduction, but you can always put it into the RG if you want that insane weight reduction, which is partly why they are a really great pairing. Don't really use this thing for combat though, even though it looks really tough. Yes, it has a lot of damage reduction, but its damage really does not hold. The top 10 best arc fighters. In at number 10, we've got the Rhinognatha, and I find that this is very much an important entry. While being one of the newer creatures that is in Ark Survival Evolved and Ascended, of course, it really does add a lot in the combat space. It's a very fast, efficient flyer capable of doing a lot of damage and also picking up some pretty large creatures with the likes of Rexes and Paraceratherians, something which still to me is extremely impressive coming from someone who's been playing Ark for quite a while. And although yes, Cryos can do the same thing, it's still impressive that a creature can pick those up, because in a combat scenario you can also pick up those creatures too. They are fantastic for decimating bases, as they can just damage so many things at one time, and with their quick flying ability they really are quick to defeat anything in any sort of fight. Coming up next on the list, we have got the Desmodus, and this creature is capable of picking players off their mounts, making these things really great fighters. But this is sort of more PvE orientated, as I am a PvE player, but still it could be useful in potential scenarios. These creatures also have just a good amount of damage on them. You really can deal a hefty amount, and although yes, they're a flyer and it can be a little bit hard to get around some things sometimes, I tend to use these things quite a lot for general aerial combat, and a Wyvern could surpass quite nicely too, but that is only going to get an honorable mention on the list, hence here, because it's not on the list because I'm not really a user of Wyverns for combat because of their terrible turning cycle, whereas this thing doesn't suffer from that, and you get loads of other bonuses like Sanguine Elixir, which is just a blood bag farm, and you know, sorry, they are blood bag farms, but Sanguine Elixir is for that 30% taming done just like that. Coming up next, we have got the Spino, and this creature is actually quite a mobile carnivore, and I don't get why people don't talk about it more, as I sort of feel like it surpasses the Rex in the combat space, but I can't do that for the sake of this list. Come on, the Rex has been through a lot of times with us, at least for me, and that creature deserves a higher spot on the list. But the Spino still definitely does deserve to be here, with its fast underwater combat being definitely something to look up to, and something which I'm sure players look up to. They're pretty good for underwater caves in that aspect too, and you can bring them into given boss scenarios as well, which is great too. If you don't want to bring Rexes in and you've got loads of Spinos, or if you simply don't have Rexes and you've got loads of Spinos, they will definitely suffice. Although for the dragon, I would definitely recommend a Theri. Not on this list again, but that deserves an honorable mention too, as that is yet again another great fighter tame. Coming in at number 7, we have got the Thyla, and this creature is here because it really does deserve the spot. With a lot of mobility on its side and the bleed ability, the first appearance on the list, it really does deserve to be here. It's also quite a popular caving mount too, and that's sort of why I've put the other creature, which could be a little bit of a disagreement between you and me, a little bit higher on the list, as I find it is a better caving creature, and I think that is a lot more useful for general fighting. But again, the Thyla really does rule the roost in that sense on the island. It has a lot going for it, and you can easily take out things like Rexes and Gigas. Gigas, if you're careful, don't just go in full guns blazing. Probably stay away from that mouth as best as you can, and maybe distract around a little bit, see what you can do, because I assure you they definitely will be able to do that. And if you've got a high level one, then you've got nothing to worry about anyway. So coming up next, we've got the Barry, and I find that this is a way better caving mount. I know this isn't a caving list, but I find for fighting that caving use is really useful, and it's a great underwater combatant as well, so it's got a lot more of a bonus there, although its mobility isn't quite as good as the Thyla, and it does lack the bleed ability. though it can stun creatures up to the size of the Megalodon underwater, which you may or may not see later in the B-roll. It depends how much I'm talking about this creature, because this is being a bit of a faster list today, if you haven't noticed, because I'm in a little bit of a hurry, let's say. Either way, these creatures are incredibly efficient caving fighters due to their actually quite considerable amount of mobility, although still not much compared to the Thyla. But they can simply fit into all kind of caves with absolute ease and go in and decimate everything in the area. And they're a very simple knockout tame too, although they do spawn in the swamp, which is a little bit of a downside. At number 5, I'm deciding to put the Rex, as personally I really do love this as a mount. And it really does get a lot of that general fighting done. You can do pretty much any fighting need that you'll need to get done on the Rex. It is just capable of so much, and you really can't undermine it for what it does. It's got great health, it's got great stamina, and it really does pack a punch in the combat department, and there is no doubt to that, and that is why you simply have to put it on a best Arc Fighters list. You really can't beat something like the Rex. Yes, it's sort of something which everyone turns to, but if loads of people are using creature, it probably means it's good, especially considering how long Arc's been out for and how long the Rex has been out for, because it's been here since day one and people are still using it. It's not like it's a new creature or anything, so if you have never used a Rex, I implore you, use a Rex for combat. And although the turning circle isn't the best, these things do pack a punch in the damage department. Coming up next, we have got the Uranus, and in my personal opinion, I really do think this creature deserves to be here above the Rex. I've really loved this as a combat creature recently. I know people just kind of use that as a sort of healer, quote unquote, and not healer, sorry, they use it to buff their own creatures in a given boss fight, and they are extremely useful for that. But I find they are really nice combat tames too, packing quite a hefty amount of damage and far more mobility than the Rex, and they're really not difficult to tame either, being very simple knockout tames, and you should have no real difficulty in actually taming one. Yes, the biome can be a little bit harsh, but trust me, they really aren't the most difficult thing to tame. At least I've never faced extreme difficulty when taming these things, and I often tame them before I even tame a Rex, and a good high level one will carry you through a lot of combat, especially with those roars as well. If you have some other creatures along with you, it's going to be some good times. In number 3, I've got the Giga and also the Carcharodontosaurus, so don't say I didn't put them both on the list, because I'm torn between them. The Giga's been around for longer and most of the time does deal more damage, while the Carcharodontosaurus is sort of more reliable because of that health, not having the rage meter on it, and they also deal bleed still. Yes, Gigas do bleed, but only when wild. They're a little bit more reined back, but they both still really do rule in the combat space. And although the other two creatures I think are better at given combat, these really do deserve to be here. The Reaper sort of does as well. It tags in as one of those other really big creatures too. So I'm actually going to add that along with it, because with these two creatures, as the Reaper isn't here on the list already, and you know, we might as well, because the Reaper is definitely deserving of a spot here. So again, don't say I didn't put that here, but they're both just insanely, all three of them are just insanely powerful, strong fighting mounts, and you really can't go wrong if you have one. In at number 2, we have got the Shadowmane, and this really is one of those creatures where it's like, they are king of the combat space, in my opinion, apart from the creature which is in number 1, of course. They've just got so much general mobility, it really does just make these things so effective as a mount. They've got the pack buff, they can jump to incredible heights, and they really are great swimmers too, which adds to these things. And although the creature in at number 1 isn't particularly the best swimmer out there, I think it just has a few main advantages, as it's not quite as good in the boss arena is the Shadowmane, especially ever since they got nerfed as well. They're not quite as good as they once used to be, but they still definitely do really pack a punch, and I love these things for general combat. They also don't need any saddles too. The only annoying thing about these creatures is just their taming method is sometimes the absolute worst thing in the world, and I never really want to do that again. And in number 1, we've got the Deinonychus. This is still, and probably will be for absolutely ages, unless something way better comes along, my favourite Arc Fighter. These things spawn on Valguero, and you need to raid their given Deinonychus nest to actually be able to steal the egg from them and then raise that as your own. The fact is they can deal bleed damage to bosses, which no other Arc creature can, and they can still grapple onto any big Arc creature and absolutely rip them to shreds with the bleed ability. This is something just insanely effective in my opinion. Like, you know, you really do want something like this to be able to have a good combat mount. The bleed ability is such a useful thing, and these creatures have it. They have the pack buff too, which really does aid, especially in boss fighting scenarios, and they take no full damage. Their mobility is fantastic. Like the Thyla, it is simply a great thing, which I think you must have, and in my opinion, the Dine simply is the best fighter out. And give it up for our patrons, Ekaterina Puchkova and Karina Thorne, Dominic Maciejewski, sorry about that name, and everyone else that's on this list. All the people I've mentioned are paid members, and if you feel like that's something you want a shout out at the end of the video, go join the Patreon or become a paid YouTube member.